Archiving started.
Hello everyone, we're going to be looking at the historical development of American education. In this presentation, we'll be walking from slide to slide of a PowerPoint and examining how the American education system has changed from when we were a colony to now. Just checking to make sure everything's working right. That should do well. The overview is we're going to be examining the American education system. And of course, recall that we were a colony of England, that when America was first founded, and if you'll think back to your history classes, America was first settled many years ago when people crossed the land bridge, we believe, that connected Asia and modern-day Alaska. And then from there, the Native Americans, which later became known as the Native Americans, came across and settled modern-day America. Now, the Vikings were making some journeys across, as we found out later when they got to Newfoundland, as well as other areas. And they actually believe that some of them may have actually went all the way to Canada. And, of course, we always remember Christopher Columbus discovered America, but that's not entirely true because America was already discovered. Christopher Columbus was the first modern-day European explorer to come across, fully funded, and discover an area that he believed was India. And that's why he called the Native Americans Indians, and that's why he landed in what's known as the West Indies, because he actually thought that's where he was. And, of course, he landed in modern-day Caribbean, and he never really, I don't think, ever got to America. Well, the mainland. He did get to the West Indies. When they came across, they were looking for a shorter route to the Indies. They really didn't think any of the land was there. And, of course, when they landed, they had superior weapons. And from that, that's 1492, we start seeing understanding that there is this large landmass in between Europe and Asia. And that landmass, of course, was North America, later on South America, Central America, Canada. All that land was later, we realized how much land there was. And there really wasn't a short route to the India. And that, well, they had the long route, which was where the Marco Polo days, whenever he wrote about all these spices in India. And then they had the long road route that went across India, the Spice Road. But they actually always they thought there would be a simpler boat way, but there isn't. Of course, the American education system, England, Spain, and France start coming across and claiming land that was theirs. Now, you can always come across and say you're going to claim land, but to actually claim it, you need to actually live there. So England claimed North America, but they really couldn't get anyone to go there because no one wanted to move to the colonies. Of course, this is England. England today is very, very wealthy if you try to move there. London has some of the highest land values in the world. Someone recently just sold a garage for $100,000, which I don't understand. It's actually a car garage. They sold that for $100,000 because everyone wants to live in London because it's so well developed. Of course, England was controlled by the Georges at the time, King George and his family, and they were it wasn't violently anti, but they were anti-other religions. If you'll recall that the Catholic Church dominated the European affairs for a long period of time. However, Henry VIII broke from the Catholic Church due to many reasons, but he created what was known as the Church of England, which was a church that was controlled by the king. Of course, then that's how it was. It was like instead of there being a pope and Vatican City, he broke away and created one that was answered to God. However, it was bureaucracy level. meaning who got the money, the taxes, and everything, and who made the rules on earth. It was the King of England, and that's what he did. Now, many people, there was different religious groups who did not agree with the Church of England, and there was always squabbles and little bitty insurrections, but not very violent. One of these groups is known as the Puritans, and the Puritans advocated for a pure interpretation of the Bible, meaning whatever you read is what it is, and that's where the word Puritan comes from. Many of these Puritans, they would, you would be born in England, and you would say, I want a Puritan. I'd start moving towards this Puritan movement, and you would call, you'd have an election for whatever position. So the Puritans kind of become a thorn in the king's side, and it wasn't like he wanted to kill them or anything. He just kind of wanted to encourage them to not be there anymore. So he would tax them sometimes, or he would increase the rates, or he would, if you were in the Church of England, you'd get tax breaks. They found ways to make things uncomfortable. So he kind of encouraged the Puritans to leave. But why would you want to leave a well-established country? Well, there's not many places to leave to, and of course you can see where this is going. They were encouraged to leave and go to America, the new land. Because if the king could get people to go to America, then it would be kind of a good thing. Because I hate using this phrase, so we'll use it. It was a win-win situation. Because the Puritans were allowed to go to another area of the globe and do what they wanted to do, but more importantly, the king got people to move and live where he needed to have a country. It would be kind of like us settling Antarctica. It was our land. It's our land if we can get people to live there, but no one wants to live there. So we would encourage people to live there. So it was kind of an encouragement. What did the king do to encourage them? He gave them free land, free ships, tax breaks, and items such as that. So this was kind of a good thing for everyone involved. And that is what the king wanted. This is an image of the king, of course. Now, what we start seeing is people come to America, or modern-day America, and they come to this colony state. Now, when you land, it wasn't what you always thought it was going to be. You would get there, and they'd be like, hey, guess where we are? We're in America. Well, okay. And the first thing you would do is you would need to open up the chest. That's right. The king on the ship gave a chest with them. And inside that chest, you'd break it, and it would be the town charter. And it says that the King of England, all these words on there, the King of England, power from the Church of England, all this, gives this land to this group. So it was a town charter. Now, of course, as you notice, that it's a straight shot from England, many people would settle in the Massachusetts area. And that's where many people started to settle first, was the Massachusetts area. So the South, Mississippi, Alabama, is not an area that many people settle to start. Now, of course, you would ask the question, but Christopher Columbus settled, he landed in the Indies, so why would that not be the first area? But if you look at the trade winds and you look at the globe, Spain, he left from Spain and Portugal, that area. When you leave from Spain and the Portugal area, you would land near that area anyway. But when you leave from England, you would kind of meet in the Massachusetts area. Also, the weather's more favorable in the Massachusetts area for people who are coming from England. Even though England doesn't get a great deal of snow, and Boston does, they would learn that later, of course. But also, you're looking at more river transit, also access to the ports. No one was landing in South Carolina and then running to Mississippi. No one wanted to do that. No, it's too hot. But everybody stayed near the shore because commerce was life, and that's where you wanted to be. So the first area that was settled by our colonists was the New England states. And that would be, of course, New England, which is what they called it. New England, meaning New England. Simple as that. Of course, they landed in Plymouth. They left from Plymouth. They really named a lot of their cities after the old cities in England, such as New York, which is the old town of York. Georgetown, after King George. Their names are not very, let's just create something new, like Lafayette or Lafayette, which was named after the French, or Lauderdale, which I really don't know where that came from. I do know that if you look at Lauderdale and Meridian area, there are a lot of towns named after Native American languages, which is kind of nice. The New England colonies, such as Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Hampshire, were very Puritan-based, very Puritan-based. And so what they would do is they would land, and then you would go to your colony, or you would go. This is where you were. So the first thing you need to do when you get there is to create a house. That's step one. So you would create a dugout, or you would create a nice little log cabin. In all likelihood, everyone off the boat was going to start creating one log cabin. That's generally how it worked. Is everyone would create one log cabin. Because everyone didn't say, I'm going to build my house now. You would build one shelter for everyone, and then you would start building your individual shelters. Now, after everyone builds their individual shelters, that one large shelter usually became the church. And that's what they did. Puritans definitely wanted to praise God when they landed. They always did. They would praise the king and praise God. That's what they would do. They'd always build a church. Now, with that said, when they started educating their kids, they usually educated them in the one big structure and the oldest structure there, which is the church. And the Puritans definitely believed in a Puritan education. Punctuality, honesty, hard work. They believed that education was the right of all Puritans because if you were educated, you could resist the devil. We have to look at the image of the devil. The devil was Lucifer. That during the times before, in the old days, Lucifer was an angel of God. And an angel is not really a human. It was more like a warrior of God. And there was all kinds of angels that protected fought for God and protected fought for God. And then one day, Lucifer decided to go against the throne. So he took half of heaven's angels, and they went against the throne, and they lost. And they were thrown into darkness. And they land into the cave of darkness with broken wings. And Lucifer rises up and says, all of you will follow me now. That's the Puritan image. That the Puritans are afraid of that darkness, of that Lucifer image. And that by educating yourself, you can fight the devil. Because the devil, who already lost against God, is now trying to build up his numbers so he can go against him again, and that would be Revelations and the Battle of Armageddon. Instead of turning this class into a Bible study, you do definitely need to understand where the Puritans come from, this image of the devil. When someone did something bad, it was because the devil had them. And because the devil had them, it means they were uneducated in the ways of the church. A good Puritan, a well-educated Puritan, could resist the devil. And that's what they wanted. Images of the Puritans have been throughout print. This is Puritans going to church, a very old image. You see the men have guns. Of course, this isn't a picture. This is more of a painting, so you can soak that in. See the men have guns. Notice the men's flanking everyone. This would be more of a realistic, definitely. Why? Because there were wild animals in the Puritan. It was a very hard existence living as a Puritan. The men were dressed in these Puritan outfits. That may be realistic. I don't know the Puritan era outfits. I know they looked similar to this. I don't know what they would wear in the old-timey days. However, this would coincide with the way they had. You'll notice that the men had beards, and the men had hats and guns. There were wild animals. Many people thought that maybe the animals were huge, which is really, we found that this is just extra. There weren't like 1,000-point deer or 800-point deer. It wasn't like that. It turns out there was a lot of deer. And when there's a lot of deer, the size was not that big. There were bears, but not large bears. You get very large animals whenever there's lesser of them. But there was plentiful animals. Of course, there's also insects, ticks, everything else you can imagine. And here they are walking in the cold, so you can imagine how hard that existence would be. And more importantly, you say, well, this is pretty obvious because they lived in a hard life. But more importantly, they left England, which was civilized, to come here. That takes a lot of dedication. To leave, cobblestone roads. London had sewers. Rome had sewers, in fact. But London had sewers. To leave lamps, they had lamps at night. To leave well-warmed homes and to go into across a large ocean and to come here and create your own style of living. And they didn't have chainsaws. Oh man, chopping down a tree with an axe is not an enjoyable experience. Another image of the Puritan. Child treatment was not the nicest thing, we'll say. The Puritans definitely believed in beating a child because if you beat a child, then you beat the devil. If the child was bad, then you got the devil out of the child. And that's what they wanted to do. If the child was acting bad, the devil had him. So we had to beat the child. They believed in heavy doses of corporal punishment. Many of our schools today believe in corporal punishment. Mississippi, we'll just make this a teachable moment. Mississippi allows corporal punishment at the discretion of the school district. So the school district can have corporal punishment if they want to or not. I would probably resist doing corporal punishment because with corporal punishment, you can get sued because you really have never been trained on how to use it, and a good lawyer can make you look pretty foolish when they get you on the stand and they say, well, how did you learn how to do corporal punishment? Well, I practiced. I practiced on what? I practiced on students. So that's just going to make you look not the greatest situation. However, some of y'all do corporal punishment. That's up to you. Make sure you're legally okay. But the Puritans definitely believed in beating children. And they did. They really did. The image of the teacher today who beats students is a direct image of the Puritan. Now, with more and more people living in these areas, we start seeing the need to have laws. We always have to have laws. People get upset. There's too many laws out there, but we have to have laws because if we don't have laws, someone's going to do something stupid. That's what and what they had is they started having more and more cities growing. So they said, look, we got to get together because some of these cities do not have education laws, and some of these cities do have education laws. So we need to have laws on education. One law they decided to create was the old Deluder Satan law, which said every town of 50 or more had to have a reading and writing teacher. Now, that's good because, and that's what they wanted. They wanted to actually have a law passed. Many people always say there's too many laws, but this is you can see why they did this. Probably, just for example, we'll make this up, so this is hypothetical. Boston's growing, and they've got 200 people. Meanwhile, this little town named Georgetown, it's growing, it's got 500 people. Well, Georgetown has no teachers there, but Boston does. And Boston's like, look, Georgetown, you're going to have a teacher. You can't have uneducated people. And Georgetown's like, look, there's no law. We can do what we want to. So they started passing laws saying, look, if you have 50 or more, you need to have a teacher. Thus begins the era of education laws in our colonies. So that's a good thing. With the education laws being established, we start seeing a need for different levels of schools. And this always confuses some of my students, so I'll make sure I cover this well, or I'll try to. So just soak this slide in real quick. You're seeing two levels of schools. One is the town school. The town school is what becomes known as pretty much public education. Anyone who can come to this school. And they learn from what's called the Horn Book. And the Horn Book is a very little item that It's made from a horn, an actual cow horn, and they stretched out and they put letters on it. It's real simple. You'll notice it's amazing. They made whatever they could out of anything. So that's how the horn book. Teachers are usually men, and they punish the kids by beating them. Good, strong corporal punishment. But now we have the growth of social status. What are some things that could make someone be wealthy? Think about that. Today, to be wealthy, being a medical doctor will make you some money. Being an entrepreneurial, owning a business, owning oil will make you wealthy. But mainly, if you really want to get wealthy in America, the number one way to be wealthy is to inherit money. The second, of course, is like a doctor, a medical doctor. Then oil is a big thing. Diamonds, gold market, stuff like that. But those are really the ways to be wealthy. In the colony days, in the colonial era, the way to be wealthy was shipping. Shipping was the main way. Is if you could control the resources coming from the colonies to England, you could make a lot of money. And if you look at our founding fathers, a lot of them dealt with shipping some way or the other. Because of that, and because of the access of getting shipping in America, some people were very wealthy. Many people were poor, some were wealthy, just like today. And because of that, private schools started emerging. And one of these private schools became known as the grammar school. The grammar school had private tutors, literature, mathematics, science, and foreign language. Now, of course, if you went to the grammar school, your family was probably wealthy. And what was the goal of a town school? The goal of a town school was to be educated so you could learn, how to read and write and function in society. The goal of a grammar school was to learn more so that you could ultimately go to a college such as England's colleges, London, Cambridge, those universities. So that's where those students were going. Now, if you were very poor, or if you were like me and you're poor, and you could not go to a private school, you just went to the public school. You went to the town school. And you learned your basic education, how to read and write, and then you went to work in the factories, if there were any factories. But there's no factories, so where would you work? That's right, you'd work in your own farm. And if there was an issue about voting, you could read the ballot. Going to church, you could do that. If you had to, if someone made you mad and you wanted to sue them, you could read a little bit of the law. But you had to get a lawyer to help you, so you got someone who probably went to a grammar school and then ultimately to another college. So that's where we have the separation of the classes, the town school and the grammar school. There was a need for both. The dual track sets up, and that's what we see is known as tracking. The town school, once you completed, you were done. You could go work and live your life and be happy and have kids. The grammar school, once you completed, you could go to a college. And of course, we now begin our first college in the colonies, Harvard. Instead of making our students go across the pond into England to go to college, it was only a matter of time before we would create our own college. And where would it be created? It would be created in Massachusetts, which was the heart of all the education systems. So Harvard is created. These are just some images of Harvard. This is the town. This is the big where they eat, and I don't know where this is. I've never been to Harvard, so I just got these pictures off the internet. It's a big building of Harvard. You see, it's kind of old. Everything is because it was built a long time ago. This is an image of their football field. Harvard actually has a football team. What you'll notice about Harvard is it is in the middle of town. Everyone tells me that whenever they go and visit. They say it's in the middle of town. And it's true because they built it a long time ago. To be precise, they built it in 1636. and the town is built around it. So unlike Mississippi State Starkville, which is kind of off to the side, Harvard is so old that it's pretty much been built around. You had to have Latin and Greek, which you got from the grammar schools. They stressed grammar, logic, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, ethics, metaphysics, and natural science. Many people ask me what rhetoric is. Rhetoric is speech class, so you can study speech. So now we've looked at the most advanced education system in the colonies, and that is the New England colonies, because they were doing things more than everyone else. So as we move down the coast, we see the mid-Atlantic colonies, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware. So Massachusetts led the way. Obviously, they led the way. The New England colonies were kind of a little bit behind. So let's look at them. The New England colonies had more parochial schools. New York was really doing very well. They're on several rivers. They have little bitty islands. They're like Manhattan. And they have a very good business sense. The Industrial Revolution blows them up. I mean, they have all kinds of factories going on. New York tried several things. And one of the big things they tried was kind of a private tutoring system. It really doesn't work. It works to an extent. It does the best they can. New York was doing really well. But New York had a lot of immigrants coming in. So the New York education system really doesn't have time to really take off, such as Massachusetts, because they were dealing with so much other stuff. Pennsylvania had the Quakers. The Quakers are one of the few groups who do not have to be drafted, because they actually are a peaceful group of people, and in their beliefs, they don't fight. They've been so established that the Amish don't have to be drafted. It's kind of amazing. So the Quakers were in Pennsylvania. Their education was open to everyone, and they rejected corporal punishment. So what was the first group to reject corporal punishment and to teach a different kind of managing style? The Quakers, and they are still today. They have offshoots of the Quakers, and you can always go up there and visit them. They're very friendly. So we really see education in the Mid-Atlantic states was kind of up in the air. It really was. Massachusetts had it going. The Mid-Atlantic was kind of up in the air. The Quakers were doing their thing. New York was doing its thing with private tutors. And now let's look at the South. The South, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, all those nice areas. Look how big Virginia is. That's right, Virginia's big because there's no West Virginia. In the colony days, Virginia was huge. And if you look at the name Virginia, you see where that name comes from. In the South, we had a lot of poor people. Surprise, surprise. Now, of course, the South was very rich because of cotton. However, the South had a lot of rural families spread out over large areas. There were plantations, as we all know, but the plantations were different than what we imagine, especially if you've seen Gone with the Wind. The plantations weren't like that. Plantations were spread out all across the South. However, rich people did not want to live by themselves. So many rich people would live in cities with other rich people. That is why whenever you go on antebellum home tours, such as I think West Point has some, I know Natchez has some, there are a lot of big homes all together. So the plantation owner would have a nice big house, and his farm of 10,000 acres might be spread across somewhere else, and he would go visit it. All right. Of course, there was a large number of extremely poor white people. There was a large number of slaves as well, but there was also a large number of poor white people. African Americans, particularly the slaves, were completely excluded from education. Now, many people ask why, and you always think the same thing. It's so they would not rebel. That is, to a point, true. They would keep them uneducated. on an economic basis. They just didn't want them educated because they wanted them working. Slavery is an awful, terrible thing, and I don't understand why anyone would ever support it. But all the way up until 1865, slavery existed. Very sad. So, in the southern colonies, you would have all these homes together in certain areas. So what they would do is you would have private tutors. So you wouldn't really have you wouldn't have many schools. You would have private tutors. So let's say you are one of the lucky ones, and you're living in Massachusetts, and you are going to a grammar school. Your family's rich. You go to a grammar school. Well, you graduate from graduate, and you go to Harvard. You go to Harvard, and then you graduate from Harvard, and your parents say, "What do you want to do?" And you say, "I want to see the world." And they say, "Why don't you go down south?" And you go down south, and you roam throughout the southern area, and you find the rich people's homes, and you say, "I would like to live here in Charleston. I would like to live here in Atlanta." They go, "Okay, I want to live with you. You're the richest people." And they say, "Okay." And they say, "Why don't you live with me and be a private tutor to my children?" And that's where the tutors came from. Is they would come in, and they would come from the Harvard. They would come from London, and they would be private tutors for their children. And actually, I was kind of a pretty good life, if you really think about it. Private tutors would live in the mansion. They would, and just looking at a more of a social economic status, is they got to meet and talk to people who were in the 1%er club. The 1%. They had all the money in the South. They got to meet the rich people. And they'd say, "Well, who are you?" "I'm the tutor for this child." "Where are you from?" "I'm from Harvard." And they're like, "Oh, my father was in shipping." I go, "Okay." And then you would meet your spouse there. And you would also buy, and you would learn the interworkings of a plantation. So it was quite an amazing opportunity to be a private tutor. Now, with that said, it was also based on slavery, which is very bad. Very bad. So you have both sides to that. But definitely private tutors in the South. But what we're seeing there is we're debunking one of the myths that African Americans were not educated. That is true, but let's debunk it just a little bit. Also, poor whites were not. The South did not educate their whites or their slaves. And that is one of the worst things that happens to the South. Is yes, the South is very rich. Yes, the South is very wealthy. But they spend hundreds of years not educating their populace, which will come back to haunt them later. They really couldn't get people to move out west. Everyone wanted to live, just like the England thing with the colonies. They couldn't get people to move out west. So the federal government, our colonies, our actual government, whenever we do our revolution, started creating land grants saying, "Please move out west. Please move out west." But many of our people still wouldn't. The Northwest Ordinance of 1785, after our revolution and our freedom, land grants for education, they begged people to move out. And the federal government said, "Look, if Ohio Territory will give you free tax, free land, if you will create universities to get people educated, to get schools going." Benjamin Franklin, one of our founding fathers. Yes, they all had their bad sides. We always remember one of that we always say, "Well, he owned slaves or he had affairs." Well, that is true. It's true. But let's look at some good things he did. Benjamin Franklin argued for. He said that we need to have grammar, English, rhetoric, public speaking. And he definitely started stressing the need to open up this social mobility, to allow people to become educated even if you were part of the populace. He created the Franklin Academy, which later became known as the University of Philadelphia. And he started encouraging people to go to college. Now, Thomas Jefferson is our true founder, our true advocate of public education. This is what after the Revolution. Thomas Jefferson understood that there was a need for public education, that we needed this. So, what Thomas Jefferson started encouraging is the idea that we should separate church and state. So, whoa. You're going to hear people say that. They're going to say, we need to bring God back into schools. There's nothing wrong with saying that. But when you make that statement, remember what you're saying. You're going against the Founding Fathers. You're wanting to go past that to a Puritan age. When you start saying we need to bring God back to public schools, that's the Puritan era. So now you're educated. Now you know what that means. Because our Founding Fathers stressed the separation of church and state. From the beginning, from the birth of public education, as we know it today, they have tried to separate church and state. He wanted an education funded by public taxes. He suggested public schools, tuition free for the first 3 years, and if you do very well, you get scholarships. So you see where they're going. They're trying to open up social mobility, the ability to move up. Very good. Another one we always hear about is a young man named Noah Webster. Noah Webster, we all know what he wanted. He stressed the need to have our own language. He created the American Dictionary. And many people would say we've gotten away from our American education system, our ability to speak well. I do know that if you watch my lectures, I have trouble with some words. I do. The real reason because of that is, one thing is, I may not be the smartest person in the world, but the main reason is I was learned by what's called whole language. And whole language is where you see a word and you understand the word. I really wish I'd been taught by phonics. I was taught by whole language. And some of the words, even though they're easy for y'all, I've not seen much in my life. So I'll hit it and I'm like, oh, and I'll try to, and you'll notice if you ever watch it. So you can make fun of me all you want to. You'll notice I kind of butcher some words. But my sister learned phonics and she can spell so well. So definitely, but I listen to some of my students and they speak really poorly. And if you go to high school levels, you'll hear a lot of really bad grammar. So hopefully maybe we've gotten away from that. This is the Webster Dictionary, we always say. Now, the movement towards public schooling it wasn't Jefferson waving a magic wand. The monitorial method really took place in New York. It received support from private sector. Teachers had assistants, use of monitors, provided room area education, really based on numbers. New York really wanted to do that because they were having to fill these factory jobs and they couldn't get people to count. So they started doing a lot of that monitorial. But the real education, the real public education came especially after the Founding Fathers start stressing this. They start doing this public finance elementary education. In 1836, Massachusetts leads the way. They had the first board of education. They have many states were like, I don't know about this, but many states started doing this. So Thomas Jefferson advocated for it. He went around and stressed it. That he said, look, folks, if y'all want to have an education system, we need to start having it public funded. So a lot of these states start using taxes to do this. Well, no, we're not going to do this. So we, once again, don't lead the way. Massachusetts does. They're on top of this. They use public tax money to fund their education system. Horace Mann, 1796 to 1859, he was a proponent of common schools. He went around and told the taxpayers, you need to pay. And he said, if you pay an education, it was an investment. And we always hear this today. So whenever someone says education is an investment in your future, you say horseman. That's horseman, baby. You get in your face. Oh, never mind. But anyway, you say that's horseman. That education is an investment in the future. But the reason that we did that was we was telling the business owners that education, if you pay money into this, we will create educated, good citizens who can work well. Now, with that said, today's taxpayers are not seeing a return on their investment. And that's the big frustration with public education today, is we pay all this money in education, pay all this money in taxes, seeing students who have jobs, who are not well educated. We're not seeing much of that. So that's where the frustration is today. In the 1830s, 1840s, it was easy to propose. It was easy to do this. People they couldn't read or write. They didn't know how to count. So by doing this education system, they were saying, look, you can create a good workforce. And it did. He said it was the great social equalizer. If you were educated, you could function and move up in the ladder. This is just extra. This is where Horseman is buried. His grave online. This is an image of Horseman's grave. I like cemeteries. I don't know why. You can laugh at me and you can say I'm sick or whatever. I like going to cemeteries and seeing historical graves. You'll see a little plaque that says it's dedicated to Mary, and there's his grave, and this is what it says. Dedicated by his wife, Mary, and friends in Providence, Rhode Island, to the memory of Horseman, who died in Yellow Springs, Ohio, August 2nd, 1859, aged 63 years. It doesn't say anything about his education. It doesn't say anything about a great educator, a great proponent. I guess because they didn't see it then. They saw it later. But definitely says he died in Yellow Springs, Ohio. Now we start seeing the advent of normal schools. Normal schools comes from the teacher prep schools. They invited women to attend. Now you may ask, why were salaries so low? And it's real simple. Taxes funded education. Taxes, they're not that good. People don't want to pay taxes. So they couldn't get people to pay taxes, so the salaries were low. So there's always the struggle right there. When you have public funded education, you're going to have to say, we need more money in taxes. And public goes, no, we're not going to give you any. And there it is. There's your issue. So because of that, many of the men did not want to go become teachers, public school teachers. They were okay with the private schools. They were okay with the grammar schools and the private tutors. They weren't okay with the public schools because the money wasn't good. This opened the door for middle-class white women to become teachers. Women who had stayed at home, who wanted out, who wanted jobs. The conditions were very demanding. Very demanding. Because of the obvious reason. Taxes were not high enough. So people weren't willing to pay. Catherine Beecher was one of the first women to create a teacher prep college for people who wanted to become teachers. She conducted practice teaching, which we would later call student teaching. That's right. She wanted to prepare the teachers for the one-room conditions because many of the schools were one-room schoolhouses. This is an image of a one-room schoolhouse. It is well built, probably also known as the church because many of the schools did that. The schools would get their money together and put up the church and say, okay, we have built the school. There it is. Now we need to get a teacher. So they wouldn't want to pay them much. They'd bring in a teacher. Here's another one. It's an old Western one. They saved it. They made a museum out of it. There's an image inside of one of them. Another image of inside them. The teacher had to do everything. The teacher was the janitor, the educator, the record keeper, the money, everything. So many times, school districts had very tough rules on their women teachers. They would say, you'd become a teacher, you'd go to Catherine Beecher School or whatever, and you get your certificate, and then you go to Oxford School. And you'd say, hey, you'd go to the Oxford mayor's office. I'm a teacher. And they'd say, you need to come see the city council. So you stand in front of the city council, and then you say, I want to be the teacher. And they'd say, okay, what are your qualifications? And they'd ask you a bunch of questions. And they'd say, look, we'll build you a school, but you can't date. Why can't I date? Well, if you date, you might get married, and then we lose a teacher because your husband's not going to want you to work. So many school districts had requirements on their teachers that said they couldn't date. Oh, that's pretty rough. But that's what they do. America's secondary schools. We start seeing the growth of our secondary schools. So even though we had our public schools, we start seeing our high schools emerging, our 7th and 8th grade. And this replaced our Latin and grammar schools. The high school eventually replaced the academy. States then started passing compulsory attendance laws, meaning everyone had to be in school at a certain age. So even the states agreed, all the states started agreeing that we need to have an education for our students. Cities wanted a workforce. Traditionalists saw it as a college prep system. So we start seeing the struggle between high school. What is the goal of high school? Is it a place to prepare people for the workforce, or is it a place for people to get ready for college? There it is. Vo-tech or academic. Can it be both? Well, we'll see. In 1892, the Committee of 10 to guide the education. By 1918, 30 states required school attendance until age 16. By 1918, the National Education Association said we should help the non-college seeking student. Now you may say, what's this about? What do you mean committees? There was so much money being poured into education because of the taxes. We start seeing groups emerge, such as the National Education Association. We start seeing committees start popping up, committees from our legislators. We start seeing committees of just private sector start popping up, trying to determine where is this going to go. By the 1900s, by 1910, definitely by 1920, we see structured education systems all across the board in our states, all of our states. We start seeing a structured education system. And we start saying, well, where should we go from here? We have compulsory education laws. Where should we go from here? Secondary school organizations, it becomes kind of what do you want to do with your schools? But then something happened to us that just completely shocked us. And that something that happened to us was Sputnik. Sputnik was a satellite. And this is it right here. It was just a typical satellite from Russia. Russia launched it. This is a model of Sputnik. I don't have a picture of the original. And it went out into space, and all it did was beep, beep, beep. That's all it did. But we were scared to death because we were afraid the Russians were ahead of us, and they were. They were ahead of us on the satellites. So that's when Kennedy comes on, and he says, I say we put a man and return him from the moon because we weren't the first in space. We weren't the first satellite in space. We weren't the first person to put a monkey in space. The Russians did that too. The monkey died, of course. We weren't the first to put a dog in space. The dog died too. But the Russians did all that. So we went for the moon, and we got it. We beat them because we started stressing our education system. We started saying we need to stress mathematics. We need to start stressing science and elements such as that. American colleges, we start seeing the colleges really emerging everywhere. We've talked about this. Harvard, Yale, William and Mary, Princeton, as well as others developed. Then the Moral Land Grant pops up in 1862. Remember, all land is owned by the federal government. All land is owned by the federal government. That's called eminent domain. So if the federal government wants to put a missile silo at your house, they can buy the land from you and say it's theirs. You don't own land, you rent it. That's right. Yeah, you didn't know that, did you? You rent the land from the government. That's how it works. Well, the federal government, that's why they charge taxes for you. If you don't pay your taxes, you have to give your land back. So the federal government passed the Moral Land Grant because we had a bunch of uneducated people. We did. So in 1862, the federal government said, look, we will give free land, free federal land. We'll buy it from farmers, and we'll give it to the states. That's right. We'll give it to the states if they create universities which encourage the education of farmers. That's what we'll do. Well, Mississippi jumped on that, and look what was created. Mississippi State University, which is a land-grant institution, the Morrill Land Grant, and becomes known as a farmers' agricultural school. That's what Texas A&M, agricultural mechanics. See, agricultural. You hear that A&M, see, same thing. Of course, I always spend a little time right now to tell you about Mississippi State. Is known. They have a very good vet school, and we have a bunch of cows down there at the vet school. And one day during a football game against our rivals, Ole Miss, a cow broke from the gate, and wandered onto the football field. The cow had a bell wrapped around its neck, and because of that, I think Mississippi State won or something like that. Not because of the cow, they just won the game. So people started saying that should be our mascot. We'll start bringing cowbells, and that's where the birth of the cowbell came. That's where it also became known as a cow town, because when you used to come to Mississippi State, there'd be pens of cows out there because of our vet school, which is number 3 in the nation, by the way. I didn't know that, did you? There you go. Now you learned something. Junior colleges start emerging. Community colleges. Also, the GI Bill comes into play. During the 1940s, during World War II, we said if you go to war, if you join the Army, we'll pay for your college. The government, the federal government, started encouraging people to go get educated. One of the main issues about education has always been diversity. Diversity of African Americans, Native Americans, and Hispanics. We have not done well on these areas, obviously. Now, many people will say, well, it's not my fault. Well, no, it's not your fault. None of us owned slaves. None of us took land from Native Americans. However, it is what it is. Our ancestors did. Because of that, we have created hundreds of years of issues with diversity. And we have to address these. We definitely. For example, as you know, the African Americans weren't even allowed to be educated until 1865, and then after 1865, Reconstruction comes into play in Mississippi, 1877, and with that we have the Jim Crow era. The Jim Crow era was an era where the South kind of just says, hey, we lost the Civil War, we're now going to punish you socially. We'll have segregated schools. Well, and they have poor, very poor African American schools and very nice white schools. So African Americans really weren't properly educated, really weren't given the chance until integration in the 1960s, which is really sad. Booker T. Washington, one of the first advocates for civil rights of African Americans, has kind of been slammed by the past. And the reason Booker T. Washington says that African Americans should, he says education would prepare African Americans to become competent workers, uplift through work. The harder you work, the better you are socially. But here's where he gets kind of, in all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one is the hand in all things essential to mutual progress. And that's where Booker T. Washington really gets hammered by his own members of his community, is they stress that he says it was okay to be segregated as long as we're all educated. Now, they really slam him too. I really don't believe that. I believe he did the best he could in the times he lived in. Now, of course, one of the opposites of him would be W.E.B. Du Bois. W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the first African-American from Harvard with a Ph.D., said that that African-Americans should get educated, but that they should be socially equal no matter what. But here's one of the big things I like about W.E.B. Du Bois. He wanted the talented 10th, and I love that idea, that 10% of every ethnic group, now I'm going to use it in the broad terms, but he said that 10% of every ethnic group should have PhDs, should have high-level degrees. And that 10% will be talented enough to lead and guide the rest. Pretty good. what he said more specifically was that African Americans need to have 10% of people with the highest degrees. But I like to use it for everybody. It'd be good if 10% of all Southerners had PhDs, if 10% of all Mississippians, if we could do 10% with the highest degree. Now, he wanted 10% of African Americans with a degree, and they would lead that. They've never reached that level, and that is sad. Something they're still trying to reach. Native Americans were treated very poorly. The idea of assimilation, boarding schools. We tried to put Native Americans inside schools and have them they were taught by strict white Puritan-based women, pretty much, and they would beat them. And the stories that came from the Native American schools was not good. It did not work. Assimilation does not work. Latino Americans, the fastest growing ethnic group, bilingual education, the Chicano movement, Cesar Chavez, right here. So, as we look at the brief history of education and we see where education has gone, we see what we have looked at just with these slides. On a side note, this software is known as Prezi, and Prezi allows you to do more with PowerPoints than just what I was showing you. So hopefully you'll like this. We've followed through and looked at the education system, the history of education system. In this, hopefully you enjoyed it. I know I did. And if you have any questions, just send me an email. Thank you for listening. Let me go ahead and close this down.